Have you ever found yourself in, well, a really difficult moment? Maybe a high-stakes conversation, or getting some unexpected criticism, or perhaps facing a really tight deadline,
Mm.
and you just feel yourself automatically slipping back into a pattern. A way of reacting you promised yourself you wouldn't repeat.
Oh, absolutely. It happens so fast, doesn't it? Faster than you can even think.
Exactly. It's like this familiar, almost electric jolt. Maybe for you, it's that heat rising in your chest, that physical warning sign.
Or the breath just disappears. Suddenly it's shallow. You're holding it.
Yeah, or that invisible tension that just takes over, pulls your shoulders up, bracing your whole system for something.
Yeah.
Something that might not even be coming.
It's a really fundamental physical shift, isn't it? And whether your go-to is to try and fix everything or perform or maybe apologize profusely or even just vanish,
Mm,
these reactions arrive so quickly they feel, well, deeply instinctual. Like they're the only choice you have in that moment.
they really do.
Yeah.
And I think that's the core idea we're diving into today. That maybe these aren't inherent human instincts, hardwired from birth,
Mm.
but actually deeply learned strategies, echoes of protection mechanisms that, look, they worked perfectly well once upon a time.
Precisely. And what if, that sudden tightness in your throat or that compulsive need to control the outcome or maybe the urge to just go completely silent?
Yeah.
What if those aren't current mistakes? What if they're actually powerful somatic memories? Your body isn't betraying you with these intense reactions. It might actually be protecting you the only way it knows how.
Using a survival map it drew maybe decades ago.
Exactly, using that old map.
That's such a central and I think deeply compassionate question
Mm.
raised in this really insightful piece by Helen Mudiba titled Why You React the Same Way Every Time.
Hmm.
We're exploring this idea that these automatic reactions, often formed in childhood environments that, let's face it, required some pretty unique survival skills.
They certainly do.
They become these silent, repetitive patterns,
Mm.
and they quietly shape and often really restrict our adult lives. So our mission today is to try and understand how we can move from that unconscious reaction towards more conscious response.
And the structure the article gives us for this journey is called The Pathway to Sovereignty. It's a framework that offers, well, a really compassionate map for recognizing where we are when adversity hits.
It sounds like such a useful map, but the article specifically warns against using it like a checklist, doesn't it? Or like a ladder you have to climb perfectly. How do we make sure listeners see this as, an orientation tool, a way to locate themselves rather than another way to judge themselves?
That distinction is absolutely vital. The Pathway to Sovereignty outlines 6 levels: survival, stability, self-awareness, integrity, wholeness, and finally, freedom.
Okay.
But it is explicitly not a hierarchy to be mastered. You don't fail if you find yourself back in survival mode. That's not failure. The success, the real win, lies entirely in the awareness. Just the simple act of recognizing, okay, this is where I am right now. That awareness is the victory every single time.
So it's a gentle map, intended to restore balance, not a stick to beat yourself with.
Precisely. It's about orientation, not judgment.
And crucially, this journey is somatic. That means it involves the body first, doesn't it? It's not just about intellectually understanding it.
That's right. You don't need to sit there trying to memorize those 6 levels right now. This deep dive is really about what you feel, what resonates.
Okay.
So we really encourage you listening now to simply tune in to the stories and the sensations we discuss. Notice which ones resonate physically for you. Where does that old memory, that tightness perhaps, or that bracing, that sudden rush, where does it vibrate in your own chest or maybe tighten your own jaw?
That kind of self-recognition, just noticing. That's the starting point.
That's the only requirement for beginning this journey. Just noticing.
Okay, so let's unpack that foundational concept then.
Yeah.
The body as an archive. The premise is so powerful. Our bodies don't forget what our minds might have moved on from.
We often assume, don't we, that because we've cognitively processed something, maybe we've rationalized a difficult childhood relationship, or perhaps moved past a trauma intellectually.
Right, we think it's done, filed away.
Exactly. We think it's inert. But the body holds this, well, indelible imprint of how those early experiences actually felt. It stores the response patterns, the emotional fear we learned we had to hide to get by.
And for our audience, who are quite informed on these topics, we should probably touch on the how of that storage. This isn't just a nice metaphor, is it? It's rooted in our actual physiology.
Oh, absolutely. It's biology. When we talk about the body remembering, we're talking about the nervous system.
Hmm.
Early life experiences, especially those involving perceived threats or maybe unpredictable environments,
Hmm.
they get encoded not just as thoughts, but as physiological programs. Deep in our limbic system, particularly the amygdala, the brain's sort of smoke detector.
The bit that's always scanning for danger.
That's the one. And if danger felt constant, or if the environment required continuous vigilance, like, say, always having to perform to keep a parent happy, or maybe needing to disappear to avoid conflict.
Then that reaction becomes the default setting.
That's right. It essentially bypasses the prefrontal cortex, our logical, thinking brain, and activates those primitive responses: fight, flight, or freeze.
Uh,
And this automatic encoding often involves the vagus nerve, which acts like this superhighway connecting the brain to the gut and the heart. If those early connections felt unsafe or perhaps conditional,
like Love King with strings attached.
precisely, then the vagus nerve complex might hold a pattern of either hyperarousal, that's the fight or flight, or hyperarousal, which is the freeze or dissociation, the checking out.
Which explains then why maybe a sharp tone from a manager today can trigger the exact same tightness in your stomach you felt when you were 7 years old.
Yes. The mind might be saying, this is fine, I'm an adult, I can handle this.
But the amygdala is flashing red.
The amygdala is shouting, warning! Deploy the old defensive strategy now! It doesn't know it's 30 years later.
It's that echo effect in action. So adult criticism awakens that desperate need to prove yourself that was once genuinely vital for your survival.
Or maybe an argument with a partner sends you spiraling into silence because silence was once the only safe place when the world felt too loud or too unpredictable.
And I really appreciate how the article insists these repetitive reactions aren't personal flaws. They're not failures of character. It calls them fossils of earliest wisdom.
That phrasing just fundamentally transforms things, doesn't it? It shifts the narrative completely away from judgment and towards understanding.
It really does.
Because at some point, you developed strategies that were objectively really intelligent. They were absolutely necessary for your survival back then. Perhaps performance, achieving things, brought you visibility or stability, or maybe that conditional love we talked about.
That was intelligent adaptation.
Absolutely. Or maybe disappearing, becoming small and quiet, kept you safe from the chaos swirling around you. That was smart.
Or perhaps controlling everything. Your own emotional output, your environment, your work. That meant nothing could surprise you or hurt you. That control was a profound act of self-protection.
Or, for some, constantly saying yes, constantly complying, always trying to please. That ensured you avoided that terrifying feeling of abandonment. These strategies were brilliant, they worked, they got you through.
They successfully navigated a really challenging environment.
They did. But the critical piece, the bit we grapple with now, is that the armor we needed then prevents presence now. We carry that heavy shield into our adult relationships, into moments of rest, into creativity.
Places where it's not only unnecessary, but actually gets in the way.
Exactly. It becomes obstructive.
That image you use carrying a heavy shield to a tea party is so evocative. It perfectly sets the stage for our first example from the piece, The Story of Daniel. His deepest survival mechanism was achievement.
Ah, Daniel. Yes, he's a classic archetype, isn't he? Immensely capable, reliable, the strategist. His nervous system learned very early on that his worth was entirely conditional on his output.
So on the outside, he looked like the picture of success, high-functioning, indispensable.
Moved with this tireless, purposeful efficiency that everyone admired as strength.
But the reality,
Yeah.
the article says he was always running.
Always running. Running from stillness. For Daniel, a quiet Sunday afternoon or a scheduled holiday wasn't restful. It was terrifying.
Terrifying. How so?
It filled him with this vague, unnameable panic, a kind of free-floating anxiety that he only knew how to extinguish by creating more work, more pressure, more output, filling the space.
Because his worth was tied so tightly to his utility, to being useful.
Inextricably. The article traces this back to his childhood. His parents, it seems, weren't malicious, but they were perpetually overwhelmed, absent in that way that exhaustion and stress can make people absent.
Right. Physically present, but not emotionally available.
Precisely. And Daniel learned very early on that his feelings, his needs were maybe a burden, but his achievements, the good grades, the quiet competence, fixing things, those were a gift.
A gift that secured attention.
Fleeting, conditional attention, and that conditional love, as the article describes it, required constant, strenuous renewal.
Wow. So the internal dynamic was that the love and safety he felt could be instantly lost the moment he faltered. Or rested. or needed care himself.
Exactly. You can imagine the pressure.
Yeah.
And decades of that striving led almost inevitably to a full-scale physical rebellion in his 30s.
The body always keeps the score, doesn't
It
it?
really does. Daniel developed chronic tension headaches, erratic digestion. He'd wake up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, convinced he'd forgotten something critical.
But he kept pushing, because that was the only way he knew.
Pushing was the only language his encoded nervous system understood, until the turning point arrived with, well, stark clarity. The morning he woke up and physically could not get out of bed.
Just couldn't move.
Legs felt like lead, chest felt hollowed out. And this wasn't a failure, the piece emphasizes. This was his body's wisdom finally breaking through, forcing the pattern to stop, the ultimate protection.
So that point of complete loss of control, that's where he enters the first stage of the pathway to sovereignty, which is
Survival, that's right. All his built-in strategies, performing, fixing, controlling, governed seat. They suddenly stopped working. He couldn't do them anymore.
And how did that feel?
Raw, exposed, profoundly terrified. Because without the ability to produce, he genuinely didn't know who he was or how to justify his existence. That's the core wound of survival.
That must be incredibly disorienting, just completely adrift.
Utterly. The primary characteristic of survival is that the body is entirely in control. There's no thinking your way out of it. It's the physiological system demanding an immediate halt. For Daniel, it was that forced physical rest and the initial shock.
Okay, so as he started, maybe slowly, to recover the ability to function, he moved into the next stage, which is stability.
Yes, stability. And the article points out this phase was marked by quite a lot of anger, actually, and profound confusion.
Anger at his body for letting him down.
Exactly. Anger at his body for betraying him, and confusion because, in his mind, he'd done everything right. He'd worked harder than anyone, been responsible, never complained, followed the rules.
The good boy rules, as you said earlier.
Those very rules. And that confusion is really the hallmark of stability. The old beliefs are starting to crack that good boy narrative, but there aren't any new, resilient beliefs ready to replace them yet.
So it's a bit chaotic.
Stability is often chaotic, yes, because all the suppressed emotions start to surface. For Daniel, he began noticing the small, persistent patterns for the first time. The instant yes slipping out before he could even consider his capacity.
Oh, yeah.
The shoulders tensing up the moment his phone rang. That feeling of guilt every single time he sat down to try and rest.
So noticing the patterns is stability. And the move to self-awareness is connecting them back to why they started.
Precisely. Connecting them back to the original need for safety. The big breakthrough for Daniel came when he realized the constant drive wasn't really about ambition, not deep down. It was about safety.
Yeah.
It was the deep, often wordless belief that he was only safe and valuable when he was useful. He finally connected the relentless need to perform in his career to the little boy who learned that achievement was the only currency for love.
That realization, consciously linking the adult behavior to the child's survival strategy, that must be incredibly liberating. Painful maybe, but liberating.
It is the ultimate liberation in many ways, because once you see the story, you can start to question it. Is it still true now? Is my safety really dependent on this next deadline, this next deliverable?
Right.
The transition from stability to self-awareness is that moment the adult capacity for choice starts to gently override the child's encoded reflex.
Which then leads him to the really challenging stage of integrity, described in the piece as practicing something that felt almost impossible for him, saying no.
Saying no with quiet clarity, yes. For someone whose survival literally depended on compliance and performance, setting a boundary must feel like, well, like an act of betrayal or like risking everything.
It feels like jumping off a cliff, as the article puts it, even if the boundary is actually quite minor.
It really can. The work of integrity is learning to align your actions with your newfound awareness, even when your body is still screaming danger.
So how did Daniel practice that?
He had to consciously practice pausing, taking a breath, and asking himself, what do I truly want to commit to here? What's actually possible for me? He had to risk rejection by saying things like, I appreciate the offer, but I need to honor my commitment to rest this weekend.
And the big discovery.
The world didn't collapse. People didn't abandon him. In fact, trust often deepened.
Because his yes became more genuine.
Exactly. The critical lesson of integrity is that the world often responds better to genuine choice than it does to obligation born of fear. His yes became valuable because his no was real.
And that consistency, that practice, built resilience,
Yeah.
moving him into wholeness.
Yes. Wholeness is the stage where he discovered he could still achieve, he could still contribute, but without collapsing his well-being in the process. Rest stopped being a necessary evil or a sign of weakness.
Then we came
It's a
to
foundational resource, something to be actively honored, not squeezed in apologetically.
So wholeness isn't about avoiding pressure, is it? It's about having the internal ability to manage it without automatically reverting to the old script.
That's it, precisely. He learned to recognize the early signs, the tight jaw starting, the shallow breathing, that familiar, urgent panic rising.
And instead of pushing through?
He learned to pause, to check in. He started to trust the fundamental truth that he was valuable, even when doing nothing productive, that trust is the scaffolding of wholeness.
It's integrating the resourceful adult with the needs of the surviving child.
Beautifully put, yes.
And finally, freedom. The article describes this as the state where his worth exists independently of difficulty. Performance is no longer the language of love.
Presence is. He could face external pressure with presence, not desperation. He could rest without guilt. It's a complete rewriting of the internal script.
Wow. His journey really forces us to stop and reflect on our own patterns, doesn't it? For you listening now, where in your life, maybe in your relationships or your work, do you keep pushing, performing, or striving, even when your body has clearly said stop?
And what deep-seated belief might you be afraid will be proven true if you simply pause?
It's a powerful question. Now, let's pivot to a very different pattern, but one equally rooted in early survival. The story of Jonah.
Ah, yes, Jonah. If Daniel embodied that pattern of overperforming, Jonah was the absolute master of disappearing.
He's described as quiet, seemingly calm, agreeable on the surface.
But the article reveals that when tension or conflict arose, particularly with his partner Emma, he wasn't calm at all. He was absent. He would just shut down instantly.
And that withdrawal, the glazed eyes, the monosyllabic responses, the complete lack of emotional availability, his partners saw that as indifference.
Deep indifference, which, as you can imagine, was incredibly damaging to the relationship. For Emma, his silence felt like abandonment, like he just didn't care.
For Jonah.
For Jonah, it was the ultimate act of self-protection, learned long ago.
How so? What was his story?
He'd grown up with loud, unpredictable anger in his household. He learned as a child that the only way to avoid the storm, to stay safe, was to become perfectly still, quiet, invisible.
So his survival strategy was the freeze response, dissociation.
Exactly. He survived the chaos of his childhood by essentially leaving his body, making himself energetically invisible.
So fast forward to adult life. A simple disagreement with Emma, maybe about finances or plans.
His nervous system doesn't differentiate. It registers conflict and equates it with danger. Same danger as the childhood home.
And he goes straight into survival mode, which for him looks like
total shutdown. That numbing reflex is automatic. His thoughts become foggy, words feel distant, like they're coming through water. He's physically present, but neurologically he's checked out.
it's that vagus nerve response again, the hyperarousal.
Yes, slowing the heart rate, withdrawing energy, equating emotional intensity with a danger that must be avoided at all costs.
And just like Daniel, his survival strategy actively prevented him from getting what he truly wanted as an adult, which was intimacy.
The shield he carried kept the perceived danger out, yes, but it also kept Emma out. He couldn't connect deeply from that frozen state.
What was the turning point for Jonah? How did things start to shift?
It was quite dramatic, actually, and required immense vulnerability from both sides. Emma reached a breaking point.
Oh.
She told him, tearfully but honestly, that she couldn't continue living with someone who was never fully there, even when they were physically in the same room.
That must have been incredibly hard for him to hear. How did he react?
And this is key. Instead of dissociating, which would have been his automatic response to her pain and intensity, he stayed.
He stayed present, even though it must have felt terrifying.
Exactly. And that small, shaky decision to remain present, even just for a moment longer than usual, marks his shift towards stability.
So stability wasn't calm for him either.
Oh, not at all. When he stayed, instead of the usual calm numbness, he found deep, hidden fear. He actually started trembling.
Physically trembling.
Yes, and small waves of anger began to surface too, anger maybe at his helplessness as a child. His silence was finally revealed even to himself, not as serenity, but as terror held so tightly it looked like peace.
Wow. So stability is defined by that uncomfortable, raw return of feeling.
It absolutely is. If survival is the body taking over completely, stability is the often painful, messy process of the emotional contents starting to thaw and surface.
But that discomfort, however difficult, led him towards self-awareness.
It did. because feeling the fear, feeling the trembling allowed him to realize his withdrawal wasn't a personal failing. It wasn't a lack of love for Emma, it was a learned
He
response.
connected the pattern back.
He connected it directly back to the child hiding from chaos. He understood, consciously, that his nervous system was operating on outdated threat assessments. The current situation wasn't the same danger.
And knowing that it was an automatic physiological echo, not a conscious choice in the present, that must have been key to unlocking the possibility of change.
It unlocked his capacity for choice, which is what allows movement into integrity. For Jonah, this meant practicing presence even when his body was screaming at him to flee, to shut down. This is where the work becomes really active, really courageous.
How did he practice that? What did it look like?
He started noticing the intense urge to flee, to disappear inside himself. And instead of acting on it automatically, he learned to name it, sometimes even out loud to Emma.
What sort of things would he say?
The crucial sentence the article suggests was something like, "I'm feeling completely overwhelmed right now. My body really wants me to shut down or leave, but I am not leaving you."
I am not leaving you. That's powerful.
It's huge. "I need a moment," he might add, "but I am committed to staying present." That distinction, "I am not leaving," is an act of profound courage for someone wired for freeze. He was actively teaching his nervous system, in real time, that emotional intensity didn't equal annihilation anymore.
He learned he could actually tolerate the discomfort without dissociating. He could stay.
Slowly, steadily, yes. And the steady practice led him into wholeness.
And what does wholeness look like for someone like Jonah?
In wholeness, Jonah realized he'd spent his entire life essentially waiting for the external world, the volume, the unpredictability, the conflict, to become calm before he would allow himself to feel safe.
Right, waiting for external conditions.
In wholeness, he learned to cultivate internal safety, independent of the external circumstances. He learned grounding techniques, feeling his feet on the floor, noticing his breath in his chest so that conflict could arise.
And he could remain anchored.
He could remain anchored by holding himself through it. Safety became something he could generate within himself, not something he had to wait for others or the environment to provide.
That's a massive shift.
Yeah.
From external reliance to internal resource.
It's everything. And that naturally led him towards freedom.
And freedom meant
Intimacy deepened exponentially. Conflict stopped being something to survive alone and became something they could move through together as partners. His presence, cultivated through all this difficult internal work, became his greatest act of love and courage. Not the absence of fear, but the ability to stay present alongside it.
these two stories, Daniel's hypervigilant performance and Jonah's deep freeze, are such powerful reminders, aren't they?
Yeah.
That the intelligent adaptations that genuinely saved us as children can become the very mechanisms that limit our adulthood.
They really are.
It forces us to ask that challenging question again. When tension rises, do you leave yourself before you even think about leaving the room? Do you check out internally first?
And this brings us neatly to the deep dive on integration. How do we actually work with this? The core message here is that we must stop viewing these reactions as faults, as weaknesses to be stamped out.
Right. They aren't character flaws.
No, they are physiological invitations. Invitations to be met with deep compassion, not with harsh control or suppression. We need to understand them, not just fight them.
They're messages, really,
Oh.
asking to be understood. So when you feel that familiar rising shoulder tension, or the breath getting shallow, or that heavy emotional weight of trying to please everyone, that's not just a problem to be solved instantly.
It's information, it's data. It's the fossil of an earlier wisdom speaking to you, asking for attention.
And awareness itself, just noticing, is the beginning of sovereignty, that freedom to respond from choice rather than reacting from old programming.
That's exactly it. We have to start rewriting the body's story, gently, line by line. And awareness is the pen.
The article provides a really wonderful practical tool for this, the 7-day experiment. And it stresses this isn't about achieving perfection in a week, not at all.
No, it's about committing to a practice of awareness, choosing moment by moment to try and insert a conscious breath, a tiny pause between the trigger and the automatic response.
So the experiment asks you to meet adversity this week, not with the usual force or avoidance, but with curiosity.
Exactly, with gentle curiosity. When that automatic physical shift happens, the heat, the tension, the shutting down, you pause, if you can, and ask 3 simple yet profound questions. And you can use the pathway as your orientation map.
Okay, what's the first question?
The first is fundamental. Where am I right now? This needs an honest physical check-in. Am I completely flooded, lost in survival? Am I starting to notice the pattern but feeling wobbly, instability? Am I clearly seeing the old story in self-awareness? Or am I finding the strength to act differently, practicing integrity?
So locating yourself on the map.
Yes.
Yeah.
Then the second question, what is my body remembering? Try to name the old story without shame. Is this the child who learned they had to perform to be okay? The child who learned to disappear? The child who learned they had to comply?
Just naming that old script, that creates space, doesn't it?
It creates profound space, space necessary for the next step, which is the third question, guiding the action. What would one level up feel like?
And crucially, we're not demanding a huge leap straight to freedom here.
Absolutely not. If you're in survival, the goal is simply to find the very first shaky step towards stability, maybe just getting your feet back under you. The shift is incremental, small steps.
And the article gives clear, practical guidance for what to do at each level, doesn't it? So
Yeah.
if you recognize yourself in survival, totally overwhelmed, maybe numb, maybe full-blown panic,
Yeah.
what's the job then?
Your primary job is not to think or rationalize your way out. That part of the brain is offline. Your job is simply to return to your body, to interrupt the sympathetic nervous system's red alert.
And how do we do that, practically speaking?
Physical grounding is key. Simple things. Put a hand on your heart or your belly, really feel your feet flat on the floor, and commit to maybe 3 or 5 slow, extended breaths. Really focus on making the exhale longer than the inhale.
Why the longer exhale?
Because that deliberate slowing of the exhale is a direct physical signal to your brainstem via the vagus nerve saying, I am safe enough to breathe deeply right now. It starts to downregulate the system. That's the very first step towards reclaiming your body from the past threat.
Okay. What if you find yourself in stability, where those raw emotions are surfacing, maybe intense anger or grief or frustration?
The job in stability is to name them, but without judgment. And crucially, without necessarily acting on them immediately.
So just acknowledging.
Yes.
There we
You
go.
might say internally, okay, this is anger. It feels really intense, but I can contain it. Or this is fear, and it's okay to feel it. Allow the feelings to move through you like energy rather than pushing them away or getting swept away by them. Stability is about allowing the feelings to inform you, not define you or dictate your action.
Right. Then, if you've reached self-awareness, you can see the pattern clearly, you know the story, but you still sometimes act on it automatically.
What's the practice then?
The practice is articulation, bringing it into conscious language.
Articulate the old story out loud, maybe just to yourself, or write it down. Okay, this is me trying to control the outcome because I learned control meant safety. Or, this is me disappearing to stay safe. Then, crucially, imagine a different response before you act.
Visualize it.
Yes, play the new scene in your head, the one where you respond from choice, from your adult self, not from the old reflex. That imaginative step is like building the bridge towards actually embodying the new response.
Okay. And then when you're actively practicing integrity, this is where you're really trying to align your actions with your awareness. You mentioned this is often the hardest part, especially around boundaries.
It often is because it involves taking risks in the real world, even small ones. The guidance here is definitely to start small. Don't try to tackle the biggest boundary first.
What would a small step look like?
Set one small boundary. Speak one authentic truth, even if your voice shakes doing it. If you relate to Daniel, maybe say no to one small unnecessary request this week. If you relate to Jonah, maybe state, I feel fear right now, instead of just going silent. The physical shaking, the discomfort, that is the feeling of courage in action. It means you're doing it.
That's a great reframe. The shaking is the proof of courage. Okay, what about if you find yourself operating more from wholeness? You've developed some capacity to hold yourself through conflict. What's the practice then?
The practice in wholeness often shifts outwards towards interdependence. The challenge becomes, can you stay present with other people's discomfort?
So not just managing your own reaction, but staying with theirs.
Exactly. Can you stay present with your partner's frustration or your colleague's stress without feeling that compulsive need to fix their feelings immediately, or without needing to flee the room because their emotion feels overwhelming? This is where true, mature intimacy deepens, because you're offering your presence without losing your own center, your own sense of safety.
That sounds like really advanced practice.
It is, and it unfolds over time.
And finally, what if you're experiencing moments of freedom? Those times when you respond with presence and choice, and it feels almost effortless. And they often arrive unexpectedly, don't they?
They often do.
Yeah.
The practice here is profound gentleness. especially towards yourself,
Why gentleness?
because you will inevitably slip back into old patterns sometimes. Healing isn't a straight line, it's much more like a spiral. So when you do get triggered again, the practice of freedom is to meet that slip with the same compassion you'd offer a dear friend who stumbled. No harshness.
So freedom includes the freedom to be imperfect.
Absolutely. The strength of this level isn't the permanent absence of triggers, but the immediate, gentle, compassionate return to presence when a trigger does occur. It's the speed and kindness of the recovery.
So the promise of this 7-day experiment isn't that all adversity vanishes or you'll never get triggered again.
Not at all.
It's that you will notice space where there was once only that automatic, instantaneous reaction. And that space, that tiny pause, that conscious breath, that's everything.
That's where your sovereignty lives. That's where choice becomes possible.
Which brings us towards our closing reflection. It feels really important to internalize this core restorative message from the article.
That your body has never, ever been against you. Every reaction, every single impulse to flee or fix or perform or disappear, it has been a beautiful, necessary act of protection. An echo of love that learned, maybe too soon, how to keep you safe.
You are not broken, you're unfolding.
Sure.
We're learning that the strategies that save the child are not always needed by the resourceful adult you are today.
And every time you return to presence, every time you eat a difficult moment with awareness instead of just pure conditioning, that is a profound victory. A quiet revolution.
You have the resources now.
Yeah.
You have the capacity to choose presence over those old patterns. It doesn't mean that fear just disappears overnight.
No, but it means you can hold that fear, acknowledge it, and still choose your response. You can honor the wisdom of the child who learned to survive, and simultaneously step into the role of the adult who is learning to thrive through conscious choice.
So we'd like to invite you, the listener, to carry this provocative question with you, maybe just for today. What would it feel like to meet this next moment of pressure, this next challenge, without the usual armor? Just for a moment.
And if you feel ready to begin or continue the somatic journey of recognition and choice, we strongly recommend you utilize the resources mentioned in the piece. They're designed to support this very process.
Yes. First, there's a free resource available in the show notes. It's a guided PDF titled, Where Am I on the Staircase to Sovereignty? And this guide includes specific somatic practices, body-based exercises, to help you recognize where you are emotionally and gently return to presence when things feel overwhelming. Think of it as your anchor in the storm.
It's incredibly helpful for that in-the-moment support. And for those ready to commit to making this practice a more daily habit, there's also the Reflective Companion available on Amazon. It's called Your Path to Becoming Untriggered, a journal for rewriting your reactions.
Journal, how does that work?
It's a 21-day journaling journey designed to help you document the specific patterns your body is revealing day by day and consciously choose and practice new responses in real time. It helps build that muscle of awareness and choice.
Fantastic resources. And just remember, every pattern you have ever repeated was once your protection. It served a vital purpose. Now, with awareness, with compassion, and with care, it can become your path to peace.
Beautifully said.
Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive.
Climb the staircase, breath by breath, with compassion and presence.